washrooms are out in the hall if you've never been here before. Welcome to the BPEG January 2025. Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome back. Just to let you know, we are still working on our February meeting, so stay tuned. We're just kind of, again, just making sure everything's all lined up, but it will be the first Wednesday of February right here. And also we'll be putting it live on YouTube. That being said, if you have a YouTube account, if you could follow our page, that'd be great. And that way, YouTube page for us to be able to do YouTube live. So just click on it, follow, and let it be. Okay, that's it. We do have some opportunity prizes up at the front. We've got some cards, this lovely bird hardcover book. There is a really cool old $1 bill. I don't know what they mean, and a coin to go with that. And Anita made a nice quilt. So $2 for a ticket. We'll draw for that afterwards. Water bottles are here, as well as the cutlery wraps and membership papers are at the front. I think that's it. I'm sure there's something else, but we'll draw for those at the end. So let's get started. We're going to welcome Kiah and Alessandra from Gyrkite. Yep. Gyrkite makes awesome tours, and they're going to be speaking tonight about the human impacts on the bird populations and strategies in conservation. So let's welcome them.
Alright, so before we begin, can everyone hear me okay if I speak at this level? Yeah. Alright, does anyone have difficulty seeing or is colorblind? Just so we can more easily describe things if necessary? No? Alright, sounds good. So hello everyone, and welcome to our presentation. Tonight we'll be talking about the human impacts on bird populations and the strategies for their conservation. So here's an overview of what we'll be covering tonight. First, we'll do a bit of introduction, tell you about ourselves and our connection to bird conservation, and then we'll discuss some of the major challenges that birds face, followed by how they're being affected, and then finally we'll discuss how scientists are getting the data and what we as a community can do to help.
So before we get too far into the presentation, a bit about ourselves. My name is Kiah.
And I'm Alessandra.
And we're co-founders and guides at Gyrkite Birding Tours, a company we created in January of 2024 to allow us to travel all over the province, showcasing Ontario's amazing ecosystems to everyone. From North Bay to Point Pelee to Saugeen, Bruce Peninsula, we travel all over the province. So I grew up on a 25-acre forested property that backs onto thousands of acres of uninterrupted forest north of Wyerton. As you can imagine, having a vast natural area around me when I was young made it hard not to be interested in the outdoors. When I was 5 years old, I started doing the Project Feeder Watch with my mom at our backyard bird feeder, and we'd count chickadees and finches all winter. I'd go on long walks in the forest with my dad, searching for ravens' nests. And I'd always have my eyes on the ground looking for small frogs and basically anything I could find. I got really hooked on wildlife when I was 12 years old. Our neighbor gave me a small digital point-and-shoot camera, and I started photographing anything I could see that moved, from turtles to birds to mammals. The birds in particular caught my eye. And I kind of set a challenge for myself of trying to identify everything I was photographing. In the winter of 2017, some people may remember there was a lot of snowy owls in this area. And it made the paper, it made headlines, and I heard about it. And that was the first bird that really sparked me to go find it, like a specific trip just to look for a bird. Looking for snowy owls led me to connect with the Bruce Birding Club, an organization in Southampton that runs trips all around the county. That led me to find the Ontario birding community, and I attended a young birder camp in Algonquin that summer. And from that point, I was hooked.
So I grew up in the Burlington-Hamilton region with my mom and two younger brothers. My parents aren't from Canada, but my mom has a huge passion for hiking and general naturalist activities. So my passion began when she would take me and my brothers out on long hikes on the escarpment. I was always fixated on birds and art ever since I could remember. The first thing I remember my mom teaching me to draw was a parrot, and she has photos of me closely observing black swans and chickens when I was like 2 years old. I think it's really important to encourage kids to have an interest in nature and an enthusiasm to learn more about the world around them. Hence why I started a career in scientific education. As soon as I was old enough to volunteer, I visited Haldeman Bird Observatory, which is about an hour south of Burlington, to learn how to band birds. I first went on Thanksgiving weekend in 2014, and then I went every weekend since until 2020. Since then, I've completed my bachelor's degree at the University of Guelph for wildlife biology and conservation. I've been an assistant bander at many bird observatories across Ontario, including Long Point and Keeley Island. I've monitored species at risk with Birds Canada, and I lead banding demonstrations for private schools in Burlington and Oakville. Most importantly, Kiah and I started our guiding business last year so that we can continue to teach people about the birding world and environmental conservation wherever we go.
So I'm sure it's no surprise to many people in this group, but Bruce County, and especially the Saugeen Peninsula, has some of the highest species diversity of anywhere in southern Ontario. We have a unique mix of habitats, from the northern limit Carolinian forest to the coniferous forest of North Bruce, to elvars, cliffs, and coastal fens. The result of this is a bounty of different species, from mammals to birds to plants. The annual breeding bird species number on the Bruce is close to 200 different species. Some of the best known birding locations in the province, such as Point Pelee, experience phenomenal migration as birds pass through each spring and fall. Despite that, though, there are not that many to stick around to breed. They all come up here in the summer. During the summer months, our region boasts some of the highest bird diversity of anywhere in the province, and the Great Lakes for that matter.
So let's begin by talking about some of the challenges our bird populations face. So in 2019, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology came out with a startling study about bird populations in North America. It shouldn't have been that surprising for naturalists, especially those who have been out in the field the last decade, because the change is obvious. Publishing the stats really solidified the urgency of the issue. So 1 in 3 birds, 1 in 3, have disappeared from North America in the last 50 years. So this is since 1970. It was estimated a net 3 billion birds were lost in that relatively short amount of time, which is just an insane number, and one that keeps increasing with each passing year. So this is a quote that might stick with you. The Cornell Lab director John Fitzpatrick and the study co-author Peter Mara state that this is a staggering loss that suggests the very fabric of North America's ecosystem is unraveling, which is a very grave statement with massive implications for the environment as well as our economy. The loss of our bird life is a blaring indicator that something drastic is happening to our biodiversity, and it's at an alarming rate. So trying to summarize the decline of so many species into a few reasons is pretty difficult because the issue is so complex. So each species faces different challenges, and there's no one solution fits all to deal with the problem. That said, there are some major contributing factors and areas in which we can certainly improve.
Yeah, so we're going to go over a few of those now. The intensification of urban sprawl over the last 50 years has been crazy. In southern Ontario, 70% of wetland habitat has been destroyed since European settlement, with over 90% in some of the most heavily affected areas. Wetlands are important habitats for many animals, so this is a major blow, particularly because freshwater wetland habitat is globally significant, not only for birds, but the functionality of the entire Great Lakes water basin. And another issue that arises with urban sprawl is the lack of natural green areas and the eradication of native species. Blocks upon blocks of new houses go up, but these areas have maybe one small tree per property, and all the trees are the same age. And if there is any green space rather than concrete, it's generally a monoculture lawn with the introduction of ornamental, non-native, and invasive species. This means there are no natural corridors for birds or mammals to use to pass through the landscape, which creates an ecological dead zone. With rapid development in technology and an ever-increasing hungry human population, it's no surprise that farming practices have been becoming intensified over the last few years. This is another one of the major causes of bird population decline. Not only due to widespread habitat loss, but because most farmland is now false habitat for breeding birds that have adapted for hundreds or even thousands of years to nesting on farmland. Modern farming practices also favor the increased use of pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers, which change the water and soil quality as well as reduce plant and insect biodiversity, creating an imbalance across many interconnected ecosystems. The favor for cash crops like canola and soybean create ecological dead zones yet again, because monocultures like this are unsuitable habitat for native species. We will discuss the impacts of agricultural intensification more thoroughly shortly, but for now let's talk about some of the major mortality threats to birds in Canada.
Yeah, so habitat destruction aside, here are the top sources of annual bird mortality in Canada. Starting with number 2, because we don't want to blow your minds too soon. So, does anyone have any ideas about what the top sources of death are? Just putting it out there. You can just shout out. Maybe
Cars.
something. Cars?
Cats.
Oh, cats, yeah. Anything else?
Buildings.
Buildings, yeah.
Pesticides.
Yeah, pesticides. These are great answers.
Lighting.
Did you say lightning?
Lighting.
Oh, lighting. Yeah, for sure. So, all right, so number 2, an estimated 16 to 42 million birds killed per year in Canada by window collisions. So this includes buildings as well. 14 million killed by car collisions, and 56,000 killed by wind turbines at number 4. So, despite being an incredibly large number, this seems like a relatively large step down from the millions of birds killed in the previous categories. However, it just makes it all more clear how much death humans are causing. In fact, Nature Canada predicts that within the next 10 years, as wind energy increases tenfold, bird kills will approach 500,000 per year. So that's quite a large difference. Now for the top source of bird mortality in Canada, so someone said it before, it's the domestic cat, with an estimated 100 to 350 million birds killed per year in Canada. So that's just like a sickening number. And these statistics are just for Canada. So bird mortality in the States is a whole other issue, with between 365 to 988 million per year killed by windows. That's almost 1 billion. And 89 million and between 89 million and 340 million killed by cars. And then 600,000 per year right now killed by wind turbines. And then the staggering number for cats, 2 to 4 billion per year, just by cats. So despite all the extensive research being done on bird mortality, there's always going to be a majority of cases that aren't even reported and areas that aren't as thoroughly covered. So the actual number of annual bird mortality is likely a lot higher than this. So it's really scary to think about.
Yeah, and the causes Alessandra mentioned are just the top ones. There's so many other contributing factors too.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the impacts of all these human-caused issues on bird populations here in Canada? So this graph helps visualize the declines we've been talking about. The State of Canada's Birds, which was a massive report put out in 2024, covers each group and almost every species in the country and shows their individual population trends. So as you can see here, there's some big numbers. Some groups haven't fared too poorly in the last 50 years, such as waterfowl, birds of prey, and wetland birds. Some have remained around the same levels, such as forest birds. But now we have the other end of the graph. So some of these birds, particularly grassland birds and aerial insectivores, are in serious decline. In the next series of slides, we'll focus on the impacts humans are having in these three groups: grassland birds, aerial insectivores, and long-distance migrants. To start things off, let's talk about grassland birds, specifically some that can be found in our region. Lion's Head's kind of in a cool spot because there's so much grassland all around us. These species are specialists, and they require large, uninterrupted meadows, fields, and grasslands, with some more adaptable ones able to live in agricultural landscapes such as grain or hay fields and pastures. Some examples that are important to the peninsula's ecosystem include upland sandpiper, eastern meadowlark, and savanna sparrow.
So more generalist grassland species that can breed in farmland, like savanna sparrow for example, have declined by 42% since 1970. And even worse, specialist species that can only live in native grassland have declined by a whopping 90%, almost all of them. Neither of these trends show any sign of stopping, and immediate human intervention is required in order for them to be saved. So for our generalist species on the Bruce, the major source of decline is agriculture intensification. So many grain and hay farms that were once suitable habitat for these species have become one of the greatest killers. And this is due to advanced harvesting dates and more frequent harvests. Rapid advancements in farming technology have allowed us to grow more efficient crops and harvest them more quickly. However, many species that were once adapted to centuries of sustainable farming and nested in these grains have now been left in the dust. So more frequent harvesting quite literally destroys the nests and young before they're able to escape. So this practice creates false habitat for many of our grassland birds because they arrive in the spring and invest so much energy into producing young and nests in one area, which they think is suitable habitat, and then they're only doomed to fail later on when the field is harvested. So young who do survive will return to the same field the following year, only to face the same challenges until all the adults are forced out of the area and forced to fight with other adults for territory, and the whole population that once existed there is wiped out. The increased use of pesticides and herbicides are not only decreasing the abundance and diversity of insects, which is their main food source, but it bioaccumulates within the food web to create issues across the entire ecosystem. But more directly, for the birds, agrochemicals have been found to not only shorten the natural lifespan of grassland birds, but it also decreases their average brain size, so it causes developmental issues for the young as well. Agricultural intensification also trends towards increasing the land available to farm by removing things like forest buffers and forest strips, as well as hedges, which further decreases the insect biodiversity and removes important wildlife corridors. Road access has also increased, leading to increased road mortality of insects and birds. And urban sprawl has also allowed for the spread of invasive species that were once not easily able to reach these areas. So this includes house sparrows, European starlings, brown-headed cowbirds, which is a native species, but has become invasive in grassland habitats for this reason, and mammalian predators like cats and rats. So not to mention invasive plants like multiflora rose and burdock as well, which are major killers of birds. And finally, global warming. So global warming has a considerable number of impacts on grassland birds, but one we wanted to highlight was the increased intensity of hot days. So this means that the hottest days of the year are getting hotter. This leads to heat waves, drought, and the early death of exposed nestlings that can't move or take shelter. So this map here shows if the surface temperature is below even or above average temperatures in the May to July period of 2024. So as you can see, almost the whole US recorded above average temperatures, with many areas setting an all-time high record. So this map doesn't show Canada, unfortunately, but you can see, you can get a good idea of the trends based on the Great Lakes region. A majority of southern Ontario has set all-time high records for the hottest summer days, and generally they're much above average.
So bringing things more back to the local level, let's talk for a minute about the upland sandpiper. So you may remember this is one of the grassland species I mentioned before. So the upland sandpiper is a very unique species, a very charismatic bird with a loud whistling song. While most shorebirds nest high up in the Arctic, this one's kind of unique. It nests in grasslands. Well, the only other shorebirds in the habitat are mainly in wetland areas or along shorelines, more where you expect them. So this species favors pastures with short grasses. It prefers native grassland, but it also inhabits dry meadows, cattle pastures, and hayfields. It's also fairly picky about nesting habitat. It won't nest anywhere where there's less than 100 hectares of basically uninterrupted grassland.
Yeah, so it's more of a specialist species, but it's kind of just settling for this region because it can't find anywhere else.
So this project, the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, is an extensive project that aims to get fine-scale data for every single one of the province's breeding birds. It was started in 1980. So the data is collected over a 5-year period every 20 years. The first year started 1980 through 1985. These were all the 10 by 10 kilometer squares the upland sandpiper was found. So as you can see, there's quite a few around Grey Bruce. The entire peninsula, well, all the peninsula that has habitat like grasslands, had upland sandpipers. So next up, we'll look at the map from 2000 to 2005. So if you could just go between them once more. So now you can see in the southern end of the county, down by Kincardine, almost all the upland sandpipers are gone. On the peninsula, there's also way fewer. Like most of the Ferndale area doesn't even have any recorded. And then, well, finally, this is the current breeding bird atlas. So this started in 2020, and it's going to 2025. So this data isn't quite complete. We have one season left, but you can still see trends. So the dark orange is probable, which means they were detected singing, maybe a pair was seen. The red dots mean confirmed. So there's 2 possible sightings on the Saugeen Peninsula. One was on Ferndale Flats, but that was in 2021. Last year, and I was searching a lot, I couldn't find a single upland sandpiper anywhere from Wyerton to Tobermory. There's none. So that's pretty noticeable. So here's a few more example slides. This is grasshopper sparrow. It's another one of the grassland species. We're zooming out here and giving you more of a global perspective, just so you can get more of an impact on how large and widespread these population declines are. So you can see red all across the range. And for this map, red means a population decline of 20 to 30% in the last decade alone. That's not 50 years. This one's only the last decade.
Yeah, or above 30% if it's in the dark red.
Here's eastern meadowlark. So pretty similar, red across the whole range. And finally, we have bobolink, which is another species that's luckily still fairly common on the peninsula, but definitely dropping every year.
So the next group we'll talk about is aerial insectivores. So this is another group that is doing extremely poorly. So these are birds that rely on only consuming insects on the wing for survival. So some examples include swallows and flycatchers. So we have some examples here, barn swallow and bank swallow, and then eastern kingbird in the middle, which is a flycatcher. So these birds have been heavily affected by the widespread use of pesticides, as well as habitat loss throughout their range. So aerial insectivore populations in Canada have declined by 43% since 1970. So that's nearly half of all aerial insectivores that live in Canada. Now this decline appears to have gradually leveled off in recent decades due to conservation efforts, but populations are remaining considerably lower than they were 50 years ago. and some species are continuing to rapidly decline. So recent studies have shown that the steep decline of aerial insectivores in North America, it's due to a lot of factors. They eat a variety of both terrestrial and aquatic insects, and unfortunately the population of insects around the world has declined sharply in the last few decades. I'm sure a lot of you probably remember, like back in early 2000s even, before then, how you would drive outside on the flats and your windshield would probably be coated in insects, just coated your whole car. And now you could drive in the summer and there's hardly anything. You hardly need to wash your car, just for the mud. So alongside the issue of less insects, the quality of the insects is also much lower than it was historically in many areas. And that's due mainly to the effects of insecticides. So this works its way up the food chain, like we said, leading to things such as high mercury levels in flycatchers, which directly affects their breeding success. And global warming is also significantly impacting this group in a similar way to grassland birds. So the record hottest days in the summer are not only killing off the emerging insects way earlier than they should be, but they're also killing vulnerable nestlings. Long-distance migrants were also identified as another group in steep decline by the state of Canada's birds. This broad group includes many different families, such as warblers, thrushes, grosbeaks, shorebirds, and among others. So almost all the species of the two previous groups we talked about, the aerial insectivores and the grassland birds, are long-distance migrants. Many of the impacts on those two groups extend to all migratory species in some way. So long-distance migrants in Canada have declined by 29% since 1970, while in comparison, short-distance migrants have declined by only 12%. So therefore, it is the journeys undertaken by the long-distance migrants that put them at a greater risk for mortality. And it's no surprise. So remember all the top human-caused sources of bird mortality we talked about earlier? All these migrants must face these threats at every point in their migration route, twice a year. On top of struggling to find suitable breeding habitat and habitat to rest along their migration route. So migration is a really dangerous time for birds, even without considering human-caused mortality. So in order to undertake such an incredible feat, they must pack on enough fat to use as fuel and build enough muscle to sustain themselves. And if they fail to find enough food, they could easily starve and perish mid-journey, mid-flight. They also have to brave extreme weather, as well as their natural predators who are also struggling to find enough food during migration. And that isn't like including the human-caused mortality. So only 20% of birds survive past their first year of migration, not including human-related stuff. So the human-related mortality is causing just like an unfathomable impact on bird populations. Human development and carelessness has pushed migratory birds past their limits, which is why we're seeing such monumental declines worldwide. For species such as many of our warblers, their conservation really needs to be viewed at a global level because of how far they travel every year. So take this blackpoll warbler, for example. The species breeds way up in the boreal forest from Alaska all the way across Canada. And once they reach the east coast, they fly up to 4 days non-stop from the eastern seaboard all the way to northern South America. So non-stop 4-day journey. So they weigh only about 11 grams on average, and the species migrates up to 20,000 kilometers in a single year. So conserving its habitat isn't so simple as preserving some of the boreal forests in Canada, because this bird crosses over many borders. It visits the rainforest in Venezuela, coastline in New Jersey, a backyard spruce tree in Lion's Head, and everything in between, all on its annual route. And it may only stop several times in its journey. So where it stops is really integral for their survival.
And to mention the blackpoll warbler too, just to put that in context, that's a bird that weighs less than 2 loonies, flying all the way to South America.
Yeah.
So finally, after talking about all that depressing stuff, let's talk about what people can do to help. So one useful tool for tracking bird populations is migration monitoring. This includes visible migration watches, such as the work I did this past fall, when I spent 3 months near Windsor at Holiday Beach Conservation Area. Here I counted migrating raptors, some coming all the way from the northern Arctic to winter in South America. So there's hundreds, thousands even, of these migration counting sites all across North America, South America, all with the purpose of counting raptors. Because many of these raptor species are highly migratory, by having all these migration counting areas at like the prime pathways, we can get an accurate idea of their population every year. So this data puts together a pretty good picture of raptor populations, and it helps give a sense of the amount of work that goes into this from both employees and volunteers. So for Holiday Beach, in the last 50 years, there's been 100,000 hours of effort by hawk watchers, not the county volunteers. And that basically happens at all the big sites across North America. By comparing seasonal numbers against long-term data from all these migration watches, as well as bird banding, surveys, and citizen science, you can see patterns emerge of species population trends, differing migration times and routes. Personally, I find these kind of watches to be so exciting. You can stand in one spot, be it here, down at Pelee, in Panama, and you can have hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of birds flying by in a single day. So you, fixed in one spot, just like get to witness migration unfolding in front of you. So when I was down at Holiday Beach, I had days where I saw 10,000 turkey vultures and 100,000 blue jays in a single day. So just seeing that there are still some birds that are doing well gives us, like people counting them, something to be hopeful for.
So bird banding is another method of long-term migration monitoring, and it's more energy and resource intensive compared to migration watches, but it produces incredibly valuable data that we would never be able to get through just passive observation. Banding involves putting an aluminum band around the bird's leg with a unique 9-digit number, aging and sexing the bird, collecting various measurements, and then releasing it all within an hour of the bird initially being captured. A well-resourced banding operation can process thousands of migratory birds in a year. Bird banders are also expected to keep a daily list of all the birds seen and heard throughout the banding hours, and they also complete a daily census of birds within the banding area, so it also incorporates the watch aspect. So why put a band on a bird? Being able to identify individuals is very useful for studying the population structure and physiology of birds. There are many bird observatories with banding operations across North and South America, similar to the hawk watchers. The goal for the banded individual is to be recaptured later in its life or along its migration pathway. So without long-term banding and tagging efforts, it would be impossible for us to know things like the lifespan and survival rate of many species. Banding can also aid in studying dispersal, tracking migration routes, behavior, social structure, reproductive success, and population dynamics. So all the data that is collected helps contribute to an extensive database of aging and sexing techniques, molt descriptions, migration timing, and all other sorts of physiological characteristics of many migratory species. And all this gives us a more holistic understanding of bird ecology that can help support conservation studies. So this is a picture of the savanna sparrow, one of the grassland birds we were talking about that's in steep decline. And we can still find many of them in the Ferndale Flats areas.
Yeah, so this isn't all doom and gloom, and human actions have made some positive impact on some bird populations. There's proof that when we realize our mistakes and we band together to make policies and quick change, we can achieve remarkable conservation results. There are some species that have made significant comebacks in the last 50 years. showing us that change is possible with large-scale conservation efforts. So if we have a look at this slide, we already covered some of the birds that are declining, like the aerial insectivores and grassland birds. How about some of the ones that are going up? So if you're curious about learning about like each individual species, highly recommend checking out the State of Canada's Birds. It's on the Birds Canada website. That allows you to go through trends of each one and like check out birds that visit your backyard or ones abroad. So for now, we're going to highlight two very noticeable ones that I'm sure many people here are familiar with. So does anyone know this bird? Yeah.
Sandhill crane.
Yeah, so a lot of people here are familiar with sandhill cranes. And that's because like the bird's this tall, like it's everywhere. Their calls can be heard kilometers away, like even non-birders notice them. So the next slide may be surprising because at one point they weren't that common.
No. This remember?
Oh, sorry. At the time of the first Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas in 1980, there was excitement over discovery of a single nest of sandhill cranes at Dyer's Bay. And at that time, that was the first nest anywhere in southern Ontario. So yeah, people were coming from all over just to see one pair of cranes. So now, 50 years later, the species is more protected. At that point, there's a lot of overhunting issues that almost forced it out of the province. Now they're doing quite well. There's a lot of grain fields for them to feed in. They can migrate safely. And the sandhill crane has seen an almost 2,000% increase in their population. And there's now an estimated 100,000 individuals in Ontario alone. So this next bird is another very familiar one, and this is the bald eagle. Go anywhere around the peninsula, especially areas with water, and you'll find bald eagles. Down at the nuclear power plant in South Bruce, sometimes you'll see 100 eagles at once in the winter when the lakes freeze over. So this map here, from the start of the first Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas in 1980, shows the confirmed breeding of bald eagles. So as you can see, there's nothing, not even one nest anywhere on Lake Huron or Georgian Bay. The only sites in Ontario are Long Point down by Rondo, Point Pelee, Windsor. And I think we were down to like 10 nests at a certain point, which is crazy. Then flash forward 20 years after the banning of DDT and harmful chemicals, as well as captive breeding programs and the reduction of lead shot, the birds made a dramatic comeback. So just to go back and forth, now it's found everywhere along Lake Erie, and now finally, 2020, and they're everywhere across Ontario. Like almost every single square in southwestern Ontario has bald eagles, and they're all over Lake Huron and Georgian Bay. So that's really encouraging. Like that's a bird that was almost gone. We had 10 left, and in North America they were down to a few hundred. But with enough effort over a few decades, it's now a bird that numbers in the hundreds of thousands.
And it is because of immediate human intervention.
So as we mentioned near the start of the presentation, the Saugeen Peninsula is a stronghold for many species at risk, including the striking red-headed woodpecker. The red-headed woodpecker is also a bird I've had a bit of personal experience with up here. For a summer, I volunteered with the Bruce Peninsula Biosphere Association, and we did red-headed woodpecker surveys all around Bruce. And it wasn't until that time that I realized just how many we had up here compared to other areas I've traveled to in southern Ontario. So it's one that's like really important to preserve locally. So we want to take a bit of time now to talk about local efforts individuals can have to help these decreasing birds. So the average person doesn't have the ability to do massive conservation efforts alone, as much as we want to, such as like buying up massive parcels of land to protect or changing environmental policies. Not something anyone can do. That said, there's still a lot that individuals can do to help. So how do researchers know stuff about populations and movement, like those graphs we were showing you? Well, this is almost entirely through citizen science. There's hundreds of thousands of volunteers all across the continent collecting data on birds. And that's anyone. Anyone can do this. These are free apps and programs. eBird, the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, iNaturalist, Project Feeder Watch, stuff you can do from your backyard. These go on to power conservation organizations and help us implement like large-scale initiatives over the continent.
So here are some other conservation strategies that everyone can start adopting that all have a large positive impact on local bird populations. First of all, we really encourage you to start replacing lawns and non-native species with native plant species. Lawns and non-native species are often useless to a majority of our native species, or can only support a small number of them. By planting native species, you can create a pocket of natural space for migratory birds to rest and refuel. It might seem insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but I assure you it makes a huge difference. In the spring, some migratory birds may only stop on their migration route only a few times, and where they stop is integral to their survival, like I mentioned before with the blackpoll warbler. Creating pockets of natural environments helps create a safer route for migratory birds, and it helps to break down our societal expectations to promote a more sustainable way of thought. There are tons of resources out there on what flowers and trees are beneficial for your specific area, so we really encourage you to research what works best for you. Another incredibly important difference you can make is by bird-proofing your windows. You can visit FLAP Canada, that's F-L-A-P Canada, for more information on what materials you can use and how to do it properly. There's a lot of misinformation circulating about what is appropriate bird proofing and what isn't, so I'm going to set things straight right now. So those black bird decals that I'm sure most of you have seen, they don't work. Or at least they would work if they were spaced 5 centimeters apart from each other. So birds still are able to fly through the gaps. They just see that as a moving branch. Remember, birds can fly through very narrow gaps, and if they see a large gap in the reflection, they can easily fly through it. And it's the same issue for the UV decals, with the added con that the UV pigments, they fade really quickly. So you have to replace them every few months, and no one really does that. So the best strategy to use is by using an oil-based marker or by getting special bird-proof dot stickers and spacing the markings a maximum of 5 centimeters apart from each other or 2 inches apart. White markings are best used for windows that face indoors because it shows up better on the dark surface, and black markings are best used for things like glass railings and windows where you can see nature to the other side because birds could fly through it. So now they see it as a solid surface. But anything that can break up the reflection of the surface, and if it's spaced close enough together, will work. So yeah, as long as it's 5 centimeter intervals, you'll never have to worry about bird collisions again. And you have to make sure it's on the outside of the glass to break up the reflection. Bird-proofing windows makes a huge difference because, as we said before, windows are the #2 killer of birds in North America. And it's the residential areas that kill them the most. You might think that it's the large, tall buildings, and that's where we see a lot of the deaths, but it's really university campuses and residential areas with condensed buildings that kill the most birds. And we don't usually see it because a lot of these birds, they become injured and hide elsewhere and die off screen, or they get predated very rapidly. So if you can't bird-proof your windows right away, we heavily encourage you to start limiting light use at night and prioritizing alternative smaller light sources like lamps in your house. So you said before light is a huge killer of birds. It's a huge killer because it attracts them to the windows at night. Migratory birds, a lot of the songbirds are nocturnal migrants, which means they migrate at night only. So the bright lights of cities and neighborhoods, they confuse them and attract them to these neighborhoods, which massively increases window collisions. So if you can turn off your lights at night, or if bright light is necessary for inside your house, to block it with heavy curtains, this will really increase or decrease the amount of bird collisions in your area. So finally, please keep your cats indoors or offer supervised supervised and preferably leashed outdoor time. So not only is it healthier for your cat because it eliminates the risk of disease, car collisions, infections, fights, you name it. Just letting your cats roam outdoors is simply not worth the billions of bird deaths each year. And it's not just birds, it's small amphibians, reptiles, bats, other small mammals. They're also really heavily impacted by cats. So things like bats, they have a higher mortality rate for things like cats and wind turbines, and they're really also rapidly decreasing. So, and any animal is just one scratch or bite away from being killed, because it just takes one scratch for them to become infected and die. So even if a bird can get away, if a cat plays with an animal, it's still going to die. So it's not cute when your cat brings you a gift of a dead native species. It's not. So remember that it just adds to the massive death statistic each year. So it's really important to consider the responsibility of owning pets. And if you can't do that, then maybe to reconsider it. So the best way to help conserve birds is by continuing to learn. And we encourage you to check out all the resources we've mentioned, and most of all, to spread the word. So bird populations are declining fast, and many of them require human intervention in order to be saved. So by taking initiative and being responsible, by teaching others around us, we can work as a community to save our environments and change the narrative.
And even like in my lifetime, changes up here are so noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
Like some things for the better, like bald eagles and cranes. But I'm 22, and I've been birding for about a decade now. And stuff like the swallows, it's like less than half. Like every year it just drops off. So just like knowing this and highlighting this is kind of an important part of why we wanted to do this presentation.
Yeah.
So finally, thanks a lot for coming out tonight. And now we wanted to take a chance to take questions about like us, birds, conservation, any like nature related questions. We'll try to do our best to answer them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks.
How are the piping plovers doing? Stobble.
So the plovers, it's a tough one. Like globally, they're sort of stable right now, but for Sobble, it's been years since we've had good breeding room. Like when I started around 2016, there was a few good years where they fledged a lot of chicks, and then they raked the beach, and they all left, and they just haven't really come back since.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the same issue for like grassland birds have the overharvesting, beach nesting birds have the raking. The raking kills the young, and it destroys all their food source. So if you have raked beaches, no birds. And Sobble, like we were doing piping plover surveys at Sobble just this past spring, and we didn't see anything. But I find it really hard to even imagine one breeding on the beach, like just walking up and down. Because not only is there like nothing, I think there were like 3 logs on the beach that they could hide.
And they like a nice messy beach, like lots of washed up debris, lots of shelter to hide behind.
Yeah, there's dogs everywhere, people everywhere, cars, like, yeah, it's just not suitable habitat. But overall, yeah, piping plovers have been fairly unchanging, but that is because we're doing like such massive conservation efforts. If we hadn't been doing that, they would be gone. So it's quite alarming, yeah. But they're good for now, at least. They're not imminent, at risk of imminent death, but we got to continue the conservation efforts. Yeah.
Yep.
So I have a few questions. The birds I find around our property hit the window, and I find about 6 or 7 every summer. So these dots that if I put them on, that'll keep them off the glass?
Yep. It's the reflection. So birds see a bit differently than we do. They can't perceive the glass as a solid surface. And it has to do with like how the UV reflects off of it. So they just see the trees reflecting off it and the UV reflecting off of it. So if you break up the reflection, they'll see it as a surface, or they'll see it as something not easily able to fly through, and they'll go somewhere else.
And these dots Are they black dots, did you say? Or
So
they're
white or black, like preferably white if it's like a dark window with like nothing behind it, like it's just inside your house. And black if it's something like a railing or two windows like directly across from each other. Because birds also, if there's two windows across from each other, will try to fly through it as like a tunnel. Like they think they can fly through your house. So if you use the black dots, they'll see the black and they'll fly somewhere else. But there's also other methods you can use, like you can hang cords.
Yeah, that's what we
You
were
can use
doing.
curtains. There's lots of other things you can try. And Flat Canada has like a whole all bunch of resources you can look at. And it really just like depends on what you're able to do, like how accessible the window is and things like this. And even if you're not able to do all the windows, I highly recommend like if you know birds are hitting a certain
The
window.
bigger ones.
Yeah, do that first at least and see if that makes a difference.
Especially too if there's bird feeders near a window, like the birds are already attracted
Right.
there.
Yeah, so it is recommended if you have bird feeders, and it's kind of like counterintuitive, but if you have a bird feeder, place it closer to your window.
Ah,
If it's within like 5 feet or so from your window, there's less of a chance that they can build up enough speed to actually injure themselves. So, and sometimes things do happen. Sometimes birds hit just buildings without windows being, like they just hit the wall. And that's often because they're being chased by something and it's startling. So that you can't really prevent. But as long as you have feeders at least close to your house, they can't, well, you're just trying to mitigate the impact of them hitting the window. So they can't build up enough speed, and it depends on the birds. Some birds have faster takeoffs than others.
okay.
But it does help if you place the feeder closer to the window.
Okay, and so the second question I have is, for years, we've been putting Christmas decorations, lights up in our house for long,
Yeah.
many years. So I just need to understand what are you saying with respect to that? So these are, some of them are just, they go on railings, some of them are on bushes, and some of them are spotlights.
Yeah.
So are you saying we should remove those?
Well, luckily for that kind of thing, like it would have some impact, but most birds, songbirds anyways, migrate primarily April through June, and then late August through like late October. So by the time Christmas comes around, there's not really too much in the air.
Okay.
So like, I mean, it is light pollution, but and it has somewhat of a negative impact, especially if you're like blaring it into their roosting spots, which often is not the case. But in the winter, you're generally safer to have your lights and stuff out. It's more important during the migration period, which is the spring and the fall.
Okay.
So it generally falls out of that period. So Christmas lights are generally safe, but if you have anything for like Halloween, for example, that's pretty bad. And yeah, anything during the spring.
But like most small, like decorative lights are fine. Like the bigger, like very bright lights, like street lights and spotlights, become more of an issue.
Yeah, or like if you have large windows in your house and there's a lot of light coming out of them.
Yeah, and the other thing is the cats. We get a lot of cats.
Yeah.
And they grab the dead birds, the ones that hit the window usually.
Yeah.
Like they have a whole route that they follow and
Exactly.
pick up these birds.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, and like if you have outdoor cats, we just recommend that going forward, we start to like move away from that habit of letting cats outside. Like if you get a new cat, start trying to train it, or if you can't take care of the cat, then like to give it to someone else who can.
Some of our friends have really cool catios too, like
Yeah.
really expansive areas that go off their house, and the cats love those.
Yeah, having like a safe outdoor space for your cat, or if you have like just a few cats, to just like tie them up to a leash somewhere in your yard and just supervise them. It really makes a huge difference, rather than just letting your cat go wherever it wants.
Okay, and the final question is, I have a dog. We live in Lionshead here, and all the geese on that beach. When I walk him there, and if he's off the leash, he just chases them and they all swim out. He'll swim after them, or they'll take off. Is that a bad thing?
I mean, like, the bad thing lies.
Very bad.
The bad thing lies in not like the individual action, but like say after that another person with their dog comes through, does the same thing, and those geese are going back and forth all day.
I see.
Like that becomes the issue. So like if we can at least like limit it, that's fine. Geese are generally more hardy, like unless they're really sick. They're generally fine doing that. But it's more smaller birds like shorebirds.
Which
Like
sometimes are on the beach alliance ends, yeah.
yeah, so and it's really important for shorebirds because they are like incredibly long distance migrants. They don't stop very often. And their stop in Lion's Head might be their first stop since Florida. So they're stopping to pack on all that fuel, and they need all the energy they can get. And interaction with dogs can just like continuously put them at risk for death. And it's like it can happen very quickly. And it just like just a few experiences, it just adds extra stress. They can't feed as much. Maybe they're spending all day hiding, and they can't get that food. It's just like a death sentence for them. So for smaller birds, 100% don't let your dogs chase them. For like larger birds like geese, it's like probably okay, but just try to think about what other people are also doing. So yeah.
And like generally don't like to chase wildlife.
Yeah, generally don't chase them. Yeah.
What about the strategy of using hawks, like having a farrier to deter the geese? Is that going to impact the other shorebirds as well?
You mean like
Like a falconry at like
Yeah.
dumps
Yeah.
and airports
Well,
and
here
stuff.
on the beach.
On the beach?
Yes, here they're doing it this year.
I'm not aware of that. What do you know the reason as to why falconers are on the beach?
Yes, they've been hired to keep the geese away.
Oh wow.
I honestly, I kind of question if geese are gonna care. Like, they're one of the more hardy species going,
Yeah.
and I don't know. Like, down at Holiday Beach, hundreds of harriers went over, and there were nesting geese there, and they'd like look up and maybe honk. That was about it.
Yeah, like geese, like you have to think like their natural predators are large falcons like peregrines,
Or an eagle,
Or
like
an
something
eagle.
massive.
the odd gyrfalcon. But
Graham's dog.
My
Yes.
God.
but in terms of like falconry birds, like they're probably using large falcons like saker falcons or something like this. This is going to be part of their natural, like it's part of their natural behavior to avoid these things.
Yeah,
So-
no, but I was thinking of the smaller birds, because these are big hawks. They're Harris hawks.
Oh, they're Harris hawks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the Harris hawks, like they're generally not targeting a small bird. Like it does have some impact, of course.
Mhm.
Like, it might dissuade some shorebirds from landing there.
Yeah,
But, like, I don't think they'd actually be like,
they could land elsewhere.
yeah, they wouldn't like be injuring the local population.
No, especially since it's just a really isolated thing as well.
Yeah.
Like if it's just on the one section of beach, it's generally okay.
Good,
Yeah,
good to know, thanks.
it's like obviously it's there. Like people are doing it for a selfish purpose, so the geese don't poop on the beach. But like it's a selfish thing, and we should be doing it. But it has a small.
Have you ever walked on our beach?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about Gyrkite Tours?
Yeah, of course. So we have a website that you could look at.
And Facebook
And
page.
Facebook, Instagram, we have a Gull ID video on YouTube. We plan to make more YouTube videos on bird identification. But yeah, we do day tours and overnight tours in Northern Ontario and in the Southern Ontario region all year round. We have less tours in the winter and we're really packed on in the spring. So we have a lot of like spring options. We do multi-day trips to Keeley Island, Point Keeley. We go up north to Hillyerton Marsh in the Boreal Forest. Yeah, and we also do private tours too, so if anyone's interested in doing a specific trip or looking for something specific, we can also do that as well. Yeah, did you have any specific questions?
I just thought I'd give you a chance to tell us.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. Do you have anything else to add?
I think you about covered it.
Mhm.
And like, we're definitely around this area a lot in the spring and summer.
Yeah.
It's pretty sparse up here in the winter. There's snowy owls and there are birds around to find, but
Mhm.
definitely in the spring, if anyone wants to go birding, it's a great time.
Yeah, we also do like family nature hikes in the summer as well. So if that's something that is of interest. Yeah.
No, I forgot what I was gonna ask you. That's two things. So the other one is about cats. I mean, it's, the whole thing with cats and people saying, oh, my cat never brings a bird home.
Yeah.
Or my cat doesn't bother, just my cat's lazy. I mean, it's been going on for years. I had a cat, I love cats, but what can we do? I mean, you guys read an article like in the paper twice a year about cats
Yeah, I mean,
and about windows?
yeah, it's basically just spreading the word. Like, the more people who spread the word and the more people who adopt this, like, this,
So they believe it more if it comes from you.
well,
than
you'd
it
be
comes from
surprised.
a neighbor.
You'd be surprised. Like, it really takes, like, the local population to speak to each other. We have, like, if we go to another group, like, we're from here. But
Yeah,
if
you're
we-
our local population.
Yeah, if we go somewhere else and tell people this, that, like, they can sit to themselves and think, oh, well, my cat doesn't do that. They can choose to not listen, right? But if we can make it more normalized, like, for example, like, not everyone lets their dog out. In the cities, people don't let their dogs to roam everywhere.
If you just had like your neighbor's dog running across backyards here, I think people might like put up a fuss.
Yeah, exactly. If more people did that about cats, then we would have, like, more of an understanding of each other.
But they don't know that. They don't know. They think their cat doesn't do that.
Exactly. So it's all about just, like, spreading the word and telling that even if they don't see it happening, again, all it takes is a scratch. They just have to play with something.
Okay. They
Yeah.
don't believe you. They don't believe you.
Well, that's the whole problem.
Exactly.
That's the problem.
So yes, it should be in the paper a couple times.
It should be,
You
yeah.
know, and you could get the vets to put the information up on in the veterinary offices.
Yeah.
Definitely a good idea.
Mhm.
Upland plovers. Can I be specific about an area, or would you prefer me to say the Ferndale Flats?
You can be specific.
Everett Side Road?
Mhm.
There have been upland plovers there for years, and I noticed the last couple of years that they haven't returned.
Mhm.
Observation, the farmers' fields have been,
Drained.
drained
Yeah.
by pipes,
Yeah.
and also opened up, and it's being cultivated now.
Mhm.
And is that probably the reason why the plovers have left?
Yeah, like historically that field used to be really good for them, as you
Yeah.
said.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's just so different now. Like there's no standing water in the fields.
The pond's
The
gone.
pond's gone.
Mhm.
And that one dot for upland sandpiper that we showed during the Atlas, it
Yeah.
was on Everett.
Was it?
But that was during 2020.
Yeah, I
And,
haven't seen that.
Haven't been around since.
Yeah, it's all these changing farm practices that are forcing all those species out of the area.
Like it's not perfect grassland habitat, but farmers, and there are some up here who do it, it's like a rotational grazing
Mhm.
where they ignore a field for 1 year and then they come back to it. A lot of birds like thrive on that. So if we can like have more of that in the farming practices, more like sustainable farming.
Or just like observing the birds and waiting for the nest to fledge before harvesting your field. That's also a perfectly reasonable option. But like even if they just delayed their harvest by a week even would make a huge impact. But because they're doing it more continuously and not giving any regard to what's living in their field, this is causing like a huge problem.
Right, I know down at Culpways Bay, working on the Bruce Trail, and there's an area that they have an agreement with the farmer to wait that extra week.
Exactly.
And there are quite a few places actually on the peninsula.
Yeah.
And it really has made a difference.
Yeah.
Mhm, it really has.
The
And
date
that's
is
why.
actually July 15th on the
Yeah.
Bruce Trail agreement. You will not hay until July the 15th.
Yeah.
So it's just too bad that we can't work together with the farmers
Yeah.
in
Mhm.
everything, but.
And like the reason farmers changing that just for the 1 week, that's the reason why we still have stuff like Savannah sparrow here. If they didn't do that, we wouldn't anymore. And like that's the thing, like we need to do something about it in order for the species to even like stop declining.
So when you do this presentation to a farming group, I'm curious, what kind of feedback do you
I
get?
mean, it's tough, right? Because like we do understand, like it's changing pressures. Things are more expensive. There's more pressure for like more crops.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be like government or like conservation organizations giving incentives. Like, hey, why don't you wait a week and here's an extra $1,000 for it?
Yeah.
Like it's tough. But, Tony?
I apologize if you've already said this, but as you know, my hearing isn't the best. I've got three things that I assume should be good for. One is bird feeders. The second one is nesting boxes. And the third one is try not to mow more than you have to of your lawns.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And we were gonna mention that one too, but tied out for time. Nesting boxes like eastern bluebird. That was another bird that was really in trouble, and the Bluebird Society encouraged people to put boxes up all over Ontario.
Mhm.
Now there's like tens of thousands, and the bluebirds made like an incredible recovery.
Yeah, barn swallows as well. The conservation efforts to build like pseudo barns for them, pseudo structures for them to nest on. This is a reason why barn swallows have kind of come to a leveling off in their decline. We've stopped them from declining, but the reason why they're not increasing is because of the insect decline. So nest boxes help up to a certain point. Maybe we can slow down the decline, or for some species stop the decline altogether. But the real problem is like the loss of insects. So an example of that is purple martin. So that's a really interesting one because purple martins used to breed on the Bruce Peninsula. They used to breed all the way up until the border of the boreal forest, like wherever they could breed. And they're interesting because they only nest in man-made structures. So only. And they've evolved that way because indigenous people would use purple martins. They would make these structures, and the purple martins learned to live in them, and they would basically eat all the pests that are by like eating their corn. So purple martins over the years, and it's only the eastern population, they only nest in man-made structures. So there are lots of man-made structures for purple martins all over the Bruce, but purple martins continue to disappear. And it's happening in the south too. They're just continuing to disappear. Their northern range is getting limited. And even though the housing exists for them, and it's because of the insect decline, global warming, like lots of other things.
And then you mentioned grass too, like lawns. And that's a personal pet peeve of mine.
Yeah.
Like you drive anywhere, like this area is no exception, like Southern Ontario, anywhere in North America. And you see acres upon acres of green grass, and often no one ever uses it.
Yeah.
It could be like butterfly gardens or like something more aesthetically pleasing too, like flowers,
Something
shrubs.
easier to manage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that would have like a massive amount of impact for bird populations. It's like if you have lawn, fine, but also please something like some native flowers, plants.
All right, we're gonna end it here. You guys know your stuff. These guys are really great. Check out their website and their Facebook page. They're gonna be around for some more questions after this. So.
Can I just say one more thing? I just wanted to clarify about bird feeders. Because you suggested about having them close, which I know about having them closer to the house. But you can also have them a farther distance away, right?
Yeah, like
As long as they're more than so many feet.
yeah, it's really hard though. If you live in an urban neighborhood, it doesn't meet those requirements.
But what, do you know what that distance is?
No, I don't.
I think generally, like, if you imagine a hawk flying over, just so they have cover, like trees closer than the house.
Yeah, like generally you can get away with it if it's at like the back of your like lawn or back of your property, like I don't know, maybe like 20-30 meters perhaps. In urban areas it doesn't work. But if you have like a large property, then by all means like put it at the back of your property. As long as the bird, like as long as your window, you can imagine your window not being like a route of escape a bird could take, then everything's fine.
Well, and even if the bird feeder is close to the house, you don't want to put it right in front of one of those windows that looks like the bird.
No, it's actually better to do so. Yeah.
Because when they leave the bird feeder, think that's the bush and fly into it.
The reasoning behind that is that if it's closer to the window, even if they do, if you can't bird-proof your window, even if they do see it as a bush, they can't fly into it hard enough to injure themselves. So they still see it as a like somewhere to fly. But it lessens the impact of what it will have. So if you can't bird-proof your window, at least put your feeder a bit closer to lessen the injury.
Yeah, we have the white lines.
Yeah, exactly.
It's amazing.
Yeah, like your bird collisions will disappear if you have any sort of like marking that's close enough. So it makes a huge difference.
Okay, thank you. Still some tea and cookies, guys. I don't want to bring it home. And we'll be trying real soon for you. Thank you.
Everybody, ticket for the